Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our first ever Arlington High School journalism panel. Thank you. So tonight we are joined by experienced journalists who are here to share their stories and ideas with us.
Before we get started, we'd like to introduce ourselves. I'm Isabella Scopetski, and this is Claire Kitzmiller, and we are senior editors-in-chief of the Ponder Page, which is the Arlington High School newspaper, if you didn't know. Our freshman year, we stumbled upon the Journalism Club, which had only 5 members. It had been some years since the school had a printed edition of the paper. Claire and I made it our mission immediately to change that.
And at the end of last year, we published our first ever newsletter, and we successfully printed our first edition of the Ponder Page, which we have some copies over there, if you're interested.
Ultimately, what started as a small interest quickly turned into a passion for both of us. Through our positions, we began to realize the importance of the work we were doing. It is quite powerful to be able to publish your own writing and the writing of others. We have learned to appreciate the way journalism allows for stories of others to be heard, shared, and discussed. Through this panel, we hope to continue to resurrect the relevance and importance of journalism and share our story with you all.
Again, thank you for joining us tonight and allowing us to share our story with you. Please enjoy the bake sale and pizza and at any time during the panel. All proceeds made from the bake sale will go to our club in printing our next edition of the paper. So please give a warm welcome to our panel and allow them to introduce themselves.
Hello. I'm Dave Denison. I'm the former editor of a publication called The Owl. The Owl. That was my high school newspaper. That's when I got started working in high school. We didn't have a journalism program, but we did have a student newspaper. And I was thinking back on it the other day and thinking about this panel and remembering that at that time, and I hate to even say how many years ago it was because it was a lot of years ago, I remember writing distinctly an editorial because I was very concerned about gun control. And I had come across some activists who were mothers who were trying to find a way to talk about gun violence. And their idea was, we're never going to be able to ban guns because of the Second Amendment. I think they came up with the proposal that what we should do is ban bullets. And I thought, that's interesting. And I decided to write an editorial. And I came out with an editorial on why we should ban bullets instead of guns. Well, here we are many years later, and we haven't made much progress on that issue. And that's kind of like what it's like to be a journalist these days. You see yourself out there hammering away at issues, and sometimes there doesn't seem to be much progress. Other times there is. After that illustrious high school experience, I did continue into a career in journalism and studied at the University of Wisconsin, got a job in Texas at a little publication called the Texas Observer, and then found my way to New England and helped set up a magazine that's still around today called Commonwealth Magazine, which was a quarterly magazine. Now it exists online, about Massachusetts government and politics. And then the American Prospect magazine, and sometime freelancing. And now I work for an odd little quirky magazine based in New York called the Baffler, B-A-F-F-L-E-R, Baffler. Sometimes I say that to people and they look at me strange. And they say, the bathroom? And, no, it's the Baffler. And it comes out 6 times a year and also has an active online presence, and we write about politics and culture, and mostly for that I'm editing, and it's a good time and you should look it up online.
My name's David Whitford. First of all, thanks for having us. This is really very cool. I didn't get involved in journalism until after high school and after college. I had nothing to do with journalism while I was in school. My first job was as a labor organizer in Mississippi. And then for one reason or another, I decided that that wasn't really my future, and I ended up going to journalism school, getting a graduate degree in journalism, which is not a requirement for the profession, by the way. We're a totally uncredentialed profession, not like doctors or lawyers or airplane pilots or something like that. You can learn it in school, but you can also learn it by doing. But I had no experience. I thought it'd be useful to get the degree, so I did that. It was a quick master's degree. My first work experience was as an unpaid intern at Sport Magazine. I'd always been a sports fan, and Sport Magazine doesn't exist anymore, like most of the publications I've ever worked for. But it was big at the time, and it was pretty thrilling to work there. My first job was as a fact checker. It used to be a great way to get into magazine journalism. Not a lot of magazines now employ fact checkers, but maybe we'll talk about that a little bit more tonight. But very quickly found myself writing stories and enjoyed that. Was on airplanes, flying around, and sports writing is great if you're a sports fan or not. I think they're good. They're wonderful stories, often about people who have staked everything on a long shot career. They're like artists in that respect, and lots of good stories to tell. I was afraid of getting pegged as a sports writer, and so I quit and freelanced. And wrote lots of magazine stories and 3 books during that time, until I looked up and found myself with responsibilities at home and barely earning a subsistence living. I thought there's four reasons. If any of these 4 things were true about my life as a freelance writer, I would keep doing them. If I was having fun, I wasn't really having fun. If I was making a lot of money, I wasn't making any money at all. If I was making the world a better place, and that wasn't really qualifying for that. If I had more time at home than I would if I was going to work every day. And I did have more time at home, but as a freelancer, you're always thinking about your next job, and I was totally preoccupied. So none of those things applied. I woke up the next day. I looked in the paper. The paper in those days still had classified ads. I saw a job listing for a job at Fidelity Investments ghostwriting shareholder reports. Not my idea of what I wanted to be doing with my life, but it came with a modest salary and benefits, including health insurance. We had a child at the time and another one on the way, so that was all I needed to hear. Did that for a year. It sort of sanitized my experience as a sports writer and convinced employers that I could do things, that I could do things with numbers, I guess. And that led to a job at Inc. magazine writing about small business and entrepreneurs. And that led to a job at Fortune magazine, where I spent most of my career. Fortune at the time was part of Time Inc., based in New York, but they had an office up here in Boston. I was always kind of a generalist for them, never really have understood that much about business, but I would try to write stories that had human beings in them and that would be accessible to a broad audience. And Fortune at the time was nice and thick, had lots of room for stories of all different kinds. So I was there for almost 18 years, and got laid off, went back to Inc., got laid off again after 3 years at Inc., and now I found my way back to where I started, in a sense. I now work for the Hotel Workers Union, where my job is to write a history of the union. The union was founded in 1891. The last history was written in 1956. And so this is my job now. I've been interviewing people, continuing to do what feels like journalism, but in service to a cause I feel really passionate about. So very excited to be doing that.
Hi, my name's Heather Beasley Doyle, and I'm excited to be a part of this tonight. Like Dave, I got my start in journalism when I was in high school. I took a journalism class and fell in love with it. So I went to Syracuse University to study magazine journalism and political science, and fast forward a few years, and was living in Delft, the Netherlands, where I started writing some columns about our family's life abroad for the local paper in Pennsylvania where we'd been. And then from there, I started freelancing in the Netherlands, writing for some local academic, university publications, as well as other English language publications. Found my way to the International Correspondent magazine, which was a lifestyle and politics magazine for English speakers there. And I did some writing and some translating and became deputy editor there for a while, and then contributed to The Nation magazine's website and Al Jazeera America before moving here to Arlington in 2015. And I've been freelancing, and I have also served as the reporter editor at the Lexington Minuteman newspaper in the town next door. And mostly when I'm happiest writing and reporting, it's when I'm writing and reporting about social issues. I particularly like religion, race, anything where ethics are involved, or I don't know, anything that is kind of in the news today sort of applies, I think. But I've also done a lot of really local things, from covering meetings and what burst pipes on the street to Confederate monuments and whether they should or should not be in churches.
Hi, I'm Abbi Matheson. I started in journalism in college. I did not attend journalism school, so I'm a testament to the fact that you don't have to get a degree in journalism in order to do this. I started writing for my college's paper, and I was immediately hooked. After 2 years, I became the editor and increased our online presence and social media presence, and did some internships. And through that, I was able to get a job in journalism as the reporter editor for the Arlington Advocate, which I did until the beginning of November. And now I work at the Boston Globe as an overnight web producer. So my experience in journalism has primarily been digital, though the Advocate does have a weekly print paper. When I was at the Advocate, I did podcasts that I produced myself. I also did all of the social media, writing for the web. So that's been my experience. I don't have as much to say as these guys because I'm significantly younger, but I'm at the beginning of my career, basically.
Hi, I'm Brenda Mahoney, and I'm a reporter because I care about you and the stories that affect you. And currently I'm able to do that in the town that I live in, which is Arlington, through Arlington Community Media. I did get a start actually at cable station in my own high school that was attached, so cable access, thank you. And then I was an on-air reporter starting out in Fall River and New Bedford, Brockton, and then I was in Rhode Island and Vermont. I got out of the business for a little bit and did some marketing videos, but still very similar to storytelling, except not so much on issues. It had a major point to it. And now I got bit by the news bug again, and after having my daughter, I was able to become the assistant news director at Arlington Community Media, and I also am an adjunct professor at my alma mater, Emerson College, to freshman journalism.
Okay, so now we are going to get into our first topic. So our first topic tonight is journalism in an era of fake news. So, as you may know, modern day journalism is not like it used to be. Today we live in a society where journalists especially those who are involved in political writing, are under constant scrutiny. Today, it is not uncommon for the integrity of reporting to be criticized. The merit of journalists who risk their own reputations in order to publish truth currently seem to be under attack as the buzzword fake news spreads throughout the nation. I'd like to turn it over to our panel and start this section off by first asking, for whoever wants to jump in first, what changes have you witnessed in the field of journalism since Trump has been elected, and how have such changes affected your career or your perspective on journalism?
All right, I'm willing to start on this one, but then next time the microphone is going to go down there, and they're going to lead off. But I'll be the lead-off man on this question. I don't think that, to me it doesn't seem that something significant has changed in journalism since the election of Trump. What I feel is an intensification of something that was underway, and that's been underway for a while. I think what's been happening in this country for a while that affects journalism is that there has been an increasing partisanship, and from my perspective, a real change in one particular party. It's not both sides, in my view, that's pushing this. The Republican Party, from where I sit, has changed a lot. It's changed a lot more than the Democratic Party has over the last 20 years. And I think they're the force that's pushing in a direction that now Trump has just taken, up to Mach speed. And it has to do with this notion that they're putting out there that if they don't agree with something in the mainstream press, they can dismiss it and not pay attention to it. And to the point where we're now in a very strange period where the top leaders in this country feel that they can get up and no longer even be bound by strict factuality anymore. And I wouldn't have thought 20 years ago that they could get away with as much deception as we're seeing now, as many false statements as we're seeing now. But the Washington Post has been inclined to notice that something different is happening, and they put a reporter from the very beginning, since the inauguration of Trump, they put a reporter on one particular beat, which is to chronicle the untruths and half-truths that the president is coming out with, and lies, let's call it lies, right? And sometimes outright lies, and to keep a running count, so that at some point it seems like it's 20 per day. There's something different about that, but to me it's a continuation and intensification of something that was already in motion.
Yeah, I just have a quick thought on that topic. It does seem like things have changed and intensified in a kind of a scary way since Trump was elected. I think we haven't really figured out how to deal with all this. I know we haven't figured out how to deal with it. I used to get impatient with my older brother who would complain about all the untruths that he read in the news, and my view before was that it's really incumbent on us as people who read the news to make those, to try to discern what's true and what's not, to read from lots of sources, not from just one source. And in many ways, it feels like there's more news available to read now than there ever was before. I mean, there's people in this room, myself included, who remember, when there was one nightly news or 3 nightly news broadcasts, but, I only ever watched Walter Cronkite, and he would end every broadcast with, "And that's the way it is." And you got a half hour from Walter Cronkite, and you missed the other 2 shows because they were on at the same time, and nobody could record then or anything. I don't think we want to go back to a world like that. It's better to have more sources of news, and we have to accept that it's going to be sloppy. I mean, that's the whole point of a free press. And if we're going, I don't know if I think we're a long way from figuring out how to separate fact from fiction before it's published. That's the whole idea, is that everything is out there, and they compete for our attention, and we we balance, we read, we consume as much news as possible, and from all of that together, we come out with an idea of what's real and what's not. I'm also aware of how Facebook and fake news and all the stuff on social media influence the outcome of the election, and I don't know how we're going to deal with filtering between what's real and what's not without tipping over into censorship.
I guess what I think about is just, I think what I've noticed in the era of fake news is, as a reporter talking to people, I think that people tend to be more wary of us, and I think it's a little hard to know because, of course, now I think we're all we're hyper aware in a way that we weren't before. People on, if I think of myself interviewing someone on both sides of the phone, right? So I'm more sensitive to what I might pick up on as hesitation that someone might have, and they're more sensitive because whatever their party affiliation, whatever their experience is, I think when you hear things like fake news and when reporters are beat up or shot, that trickles down, and it doesn't matter if you're Republican or Democrat or progressive or whatever. I think that you kind of can absorb this wariness of the media. And I remember very specifically hearing an interview on NPR. I think it was Audie Cornish was interviewing someone, and I think it was someone from FEMA. And he just would not answer the question and was aggressive with her. And I remember another time, another interview where they were trying to talk about the folks coming up, the migrant caravan coming up, and someone said, well, you reported on it. And I think that kind of tone feels more pervasive to me. And I think it's hard for us as journalists to know quite what to do about it. If you think about an NPR or a TV when you're being recorded, if you're going to hang up the phone, no one has to know quite how that interaction went. But I think that's a tough thing when you're trying to gain people's trust and trying to be credible and dealing with folks who are actively aggressive with you or who just don't want to answer questions. That's always been a problem, not wanting to answer questions, but I think there's a new kind of belligerence with it of wanting to control the narrative, and I think that's kind of a challenge nowadays.
My entire professional journalism career has been in the post-Trump era of fake news, so I don't really have anything to compare it to. I was in college before Trump, in a small college, so it was a completely different kind of way of reporting. But I think, especially what Heather said, that there is a proliferation of hostility towards journalists, and you see it at a national level when you listen to NPR and when you hear people from the Washington Post and the New York Times talk about their reporting experience, but then it also trickles down into local journalism. And I can speak from my own experience that, I've had people be hostile when I've done interviews with them, even just on a local level. And I think the fact that it's trickled down to local news is, at least for me, concerning, because local news is supposed to be, the people covering issues that are closest to you. For example, in Arlington, the high school building project, I know, is a touchy subject here. And people get really passionate about it, and sometimes that passion bleeds over into hostility, and I think that is affecting local news, at least, the mentality of the local news reporters.
Yeah, echoing that, we're just still trying to be, fair and balanced, but as reporters, we're often coming to people and asking the tough questions that they may not want to answer, or we're coming into hostile situations and unwanted situations. We all probably wish we could do the good, happy stories, right? We like those, but we also are beholden to the people that we are reporting for and giving the public information. So, and then also with post-Trump and fake news and piggybacking off of some other, I just try to tell people a little bit more, know your source. Know your source. Oh, I saw it on Facebook. Oh, I heard it on, know your source, check your source, and know the context that it's in as well. And also, please, figure out whether or not it's opinion or if it's a news article.
If I could add quickly just one more point. There's
go for it.
this weird kind of false equivalency that sort of defines the world of journalism now. I mean, when the President of the United States stands up there and lies the way he does, and when you see stuff on social media that's just patently not true but gets, people read it and they share it with everybody else, everybody who's involved in any way in journalism gets thrown into this same bag. I can assure you, everybody who's sitting up here on this stage, the people who have done this work, I think if the public had a better idea of the kind of, what the process is, and how important it is for us to tell the truth, and how important it is to write balanced stories, and all the kind of work and research that goes into trying to be honest and forthright and get the story right, and not fool people. I hate to complain. Journalism is fun, but to get thrown into the same bag with all this other junk that's out there, I think it's incumbent on us as consumers of the news to try to discern between what's honest journalism, what's real journalism, and what's fake news.
Thank you. As a student, I've definitely noticed the heightened awareness of journalism. That's part of why we're doing this today, because it's definitely piqued my interest throughout high school. Over the summer, I did an internship with Brenda at ACMi, and you definitely do notice the hostility, even on a local level, as Brenda was saying, and Abbi was saying. Which is concerning, but it is also important to recognize how this heightened awareness can be a good thing, even though it may not be in the best context all the time. At least we're, looking at the news now and reading articles fully and, analyzing a little bit more. Thank you for your responses on that question. So now I want to talk a little bit about some networks that I've been looking at, and I want to talk a little bit about how some networks can be highly partisan, and I want to focus on a little bit, for example, Fox News, MSNBC, and I wanted to ask you, do you think such networks are damaging to the integrity of journalism? And if you want to start with Brenda this time. Thank you.
I have to admit that I don't watch those channels quite so much. What I do is I watch the nightly news. I watch the newscast, where they're talking to people who may have opinions and so forth, but hopefully they're getting all varied perspectives. I'm not watching where they're talking about what someone may have said or tweeted latest and then their political views on that. So I have a differentiation between what those networks are, as far as it's more about talk and politics as opposed to what I call, straight news storytelling. So that's where I'm coming from. So
I think when you're looking at networks like that, it's important to look at, like Brenda was saying, whether or not it's a news broadcast like ABC Nightly News, or whether or not it's Morning Joe. Because Morning Joe, he's talking about the news and he's giving his opinions about it. And I think that's where media literacy comes in, and understanding the difference between a news broadcast and a political commentator is really important. Because if you just watch all of the CNN panels or, the Fox News where they have 6 faces on the screen and they're just shouting at each other. That's not a news broadcast. That's people talking about the news.
Talk television. It's like talk radio, but for talk television.
Yeah.
So it plays a role still, but different, yes.
Exactly. And I think that you see more of those news commentator panel opinion things on partisan networks like Fox and MSNBC because television has to be entertaining, and it's really entertaining to watch people yell at each other for an extended amount of time before it drives you insane.
I agree with those points. I also think, in sort of thinking about this question, I don't think that whether or not a news source is partisan is, inherently damages the credibility. You're talking, I've written for The Nation, right? Like there's a definite perspective there. I think, because no one's perfect, right? Because no one faction of our country does everything right all the time, you could have good reporting from a variety of different perspectives. But I think the integrity of any given news outlet hinges on the quality of its reporting, kind of like David was alluding to earlier. If you have quality, good reporting, where your goal is not to carry out some specific narrative that fulfills some kind of ideological, checklist, then, you're okay. The other question, though, is it good for our country right now that, and this has been talked about a lot, is it good for us that we're in, our echo chambers and that so many people are turning to MSNBC or Fox News rather than like your nightly news? Well, that's another question. But I think that's my answer on that.
Yeah, I know some people who are politically liberal that will watch Fox News just to get a sense of what the other side is thinking. I can't really do that. But again, what I would go back to here is I think that the goal for us as people who are trying to be good citizens, try to understand what's going on in the world, is never to rely entirely on one source. When I was younger, there used to be multiple newspapers there were multiple newspapers in every city, and the fun thing to do was to buy the 3 or 4 newspapers and read them all and get a different sense of how people are thinking about what's going on in the world. Now there's ample opportunities to do that online, and I think that if you rely entirely on anything, on any one medium, only television, only radio, only what you find online, you're not going to get a real sense of what's going on in the world. So follow your curiosity and take seriously your responsibility as a citizen to actively look for different sources of news and consume as much as you can and go for as full a picture of the truth as you can get.
Yeah, I agree with that, what David said and what Heather said as well. To me, it's not the partisanship that's the problem. Partisanship is inherent in democracy. Everyone has different points of views and different ways of looking at the news. But when you mention Fox News and MSNBC, and are those helpful in the world of journalism, I don't watch, as Brenda said, I don't watch a lot of that either. But my feeling is it's not the partisanship so much that's the essential problem, it's the deception, it's the shallowness. It's the fact that on television it is primarily an entertainment medium, and you can't have much in the way of illuminating in-depth discussion that sheds light instead of heat. And for more on that perspective, I really highly recommend a book that was out many years ago and can be read today like it was written last week, a book by Neil Postman called amusing ourselves to death. And he makes a really crucial distinction between getting your information in a television medium, a broadcast entertainment medium, as opposed to getting it from print. Now that sounds like me, an old print guy, saying, that one is better than the other. But it's true that the way your brain functions, when you're reading something, when you're reading a book, you're not manipulated in the same way that you are when you're watching television, and especially extremely, entertainment-driven, quick, politicized television. And his view is that we've got too, if people become too dependent on trying to understand what's happening in the world by watching TV, we're sunk.
Thank you. All right, we're going to do a little speed round now for the last two questions. So if you just want to give like a brief statement about your thoughts on these last two questions. So the first one is, what do you think the obligation of a journalist is in the Trump era? Whoever wants to start can start.
I'll make a quick statement on this because I think it can be said quickly. There's an old saying associated maybe with the New York Times, without fear or favor. We're in a position where journalists are trying, a lot of people in power are trying to intimidate journalists. It's more important than ever to proceed without fear and without favor. In other words, not pulling your punches. The one thing that I think is so crucial in the age of Trump, but it's always crucial for a journalist, is to take seriously the idea that they are a crucial part of democracy, and to think about democracy and think about what it is. And when you say democracy, that's one of these tired words, and people can kind of roll their eyes, oh yeah, democracy, supposedly we live in a democracy. There's maybe the most important thing I ever learned as a young journalist from the man who hired me at the Texas Observer, and it relates to this, is to be always aware of the difference between skepticism and cynicism. Because your role as a journalist is to be constantly skeptical, but not cynical. Cynical is to roll your eyes when someone says democracy and that doesn't exist. Cynicism is easy because you can just kind of pretend that you're more knowledgeable than everyone else and therefore discount anything serious. Skepticism is the essential tool of being a good journalist, where no matter who you're talking to, the old rule that came out of the City News Bureau in Chicago was if your mother says she loves you, check it out. And I have a friend in Chicago who's from Chicago, an editor who used to work in Chicago, who has a nice variation on that on our Twitter bio. She quotes that. My friend Anne Marie Lipinski has a daughter named Caroline, and she quotes on her Twitter bio, she says, if your mother says she loves you, check it out. But not you, Caroline.
So I just been thinking of this old, it's kind of a cliche, this old saw of journalism though, but something they teach you, should teach everybody early in their career is that your goal is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. And especially important in the age of Trump, especially important at a time when the disparity between rich and poor has never been greater. And the only caveat I would add to that is that carry out that mission, but with particular attention to upholding the highest standards of the profession.
I'd say that I think our responsibility is to do what we've always done and what we've chosen to be charged with doing, and that is to hold the powerful accountable. And also I would say, as we're doing our work, to serve as a sort of a foil for the current sort of I don't want to say zeitgeist, or the current atmosphere of animosity that we all have, and with each story to approach each person, whether we agree with them or not, with respect and with compassion and with the goal of telling their story on a personal level, if that's the kind of story we're telling. Of course, to go back to facts and to research and to have that as our bedrock. But when we're interacting with people, to really humanize each other. I think that's something that we can do in a way that no one else can do right now, and I hope that that's what we keep doing.
I think continuing to report the facts is an obligation that journalists have, especially in this era, and to continue to question things that people might say. Just this morning at the Globe, we were doing a piece about Trump's big tweet storm. There were like 6 tweets this morning, and we were trying to go through and figure out how to word the piece in such a way that didn't, take what he said as fact. And I think that's really important, to make sure that you're not just taking a statement at its face value, to interview multiple sources, check your facts, and just make sure that you're informing people in the best way possible.
Yes, and just continue to include multiple perspectives, reach out for multiple perspectives and stories. And also, I do want to point out that print, television, audio, they all have their strengths and weaknesses. And for television, I don't think you meant specifically news, but it's not just entertainment. We're able to, case in point, when I showed my students, I'll tell them to read things, but when I show them something like the Las Vegas bartender talking after the Las Vegas shootings about how she held onto a dying victim's hand, then I had people crying in the room, because you can hear that emotion. Same thing with other stories. Even with this high school, we come in and we take a tour. We're able to show you that. So there's strengths and weaknesses with each medium, and we hope that you continue to consume them and consume them critically. Think critically.
So we'd like to transition a little bit to focus on social media. So in a world where nearly everyone engages with social media, it can be an effective way to communicate and share ideas and opinions, and a way to collaborate with others. However, it brings a new frontier of attacking and venomizing speech, specifically through Twitter and Facebook and other platforms. So to start off, can you speak to the way that social media has recently become a more commonly used news outlet for people, especially a younger generation, and how have you had to engage with social media as journalists?
As the resident young person, I'll take this one first. Social media, I don't even know where to begin. It's definitely become a more common way to get information. I was just reading a piece this morning. Mother Jones was talking about the impacts of Facebook's algorithm on their numbers, and I read in it, they described Facebook, when Facebook was initially like, yes, we're going to bring you more news, they were talking about how it was going to be your personalized newspaper, how through the algorithm it was going to show you the news that it thought that you wanted to see. And I think there's a lot of dangers with that, because you can get into this kind of echo chamber, and you can do that on Twitter as well by only following, the people and the publications that you want to hear from and that reflect your mindset, which is why Instagram is probably my favorite social media platform, because it's just photos of dogs. So I'm very pro Instagram, which I think is the platform that the youth are using. Don't quote me on that, though. I'm not a young youth. But I think that it, especially with young people, has become how news is being consumed. I mean, every morning I wake up and I check Twitter and see what happened. So,
Yeah, with social media, I mean, it's another tool and it's a place to meet our audience, both for gathering news and for promoting our own stories. But for as news consumers, just making sure, again, that you know where that content is coming from, and that if you're seeing something tweeted out, that you check back with the source and the link goes back to the source, or just knowing where it came from, and again, knowing that you can't necessarily as easily see on Twitter that maybe is an opinion writer as opposed to a news story writer. So.
Yeah, I'd like to echo what Brenda said there. Thinking about this, it's really important to know what your good sources are, and a lot of people don't. See something coming through, depending on your age, your Facebook, Twitter, whatever feed, and just clicking on that. It's really important to look at whose work it is you're actually reading. And the other thing is that as journalists, we can, whether we're directly putting things out, our own work out on our publications, Facebook feeds, or interacting with Twitter, we are now potentially in contact with our readers and our audiences in a way that previous generations were not. And that can be really interesting, and it can be great for getting story ideas and seeing trends and those kinds of things, but it can also put you in a very vulnerable spot, as you alluded to. So I think those are a couple of my thoughts with it.
Yeah, talking about being in direct contact with your readers, my daughter Emma, who graduated from Arlington High in 2008, and used to work for an online outfit in New York called Gothamist. She really introduced me to a whole new way of reporting the news, because she would put a story up and they would have a very active comments section, and immediately people would weigh in, and a lot of the stuff that she got was hostile and people with an axe to grind or whatever, but a lot of it informed her reporting, and sometimes she would make changes to the story based on what was coming in from her readers in real time. And I think there's a real value in that, and I think a lot of news organizations now that publish online, do that sort of thing. As far as social media goes, I love Twitter. I've been I've had an account since 2008, and kind of proud of that. And I go there to look for news from people that I know and trust, who might have read something that I haven't read. But I think it's dangerous if you're only on Twitter, or if you're only on Facebook, or if you're only on something like that. There's two things that happen in journalism enterprises. There's the writing and the reporting. People go out, they interview people, they do research, they write stories, and then there's the editors. And the editors are curators, and I'm all about the value of curated news. I like to pick up the Globe in the morning and see what the Globe editors in their wisdom have decided, it would be an interesting mix of stories, stuff for me to know about. The Times, New York Times, will curate things in a slightly different way. Every news organization has a different way of gathering and presenting and editing and the news. And there's value to that. When we're all reading the Globe in the morning, I don't think we all read the Globe in the morning anymore, but if we all did read the Globe in the morning, then we have a basis for a common conversation. And if we're all just reading our own individual Twitter feeds, then we tend to be talking over each other's heads.
Yeah, I don't pay any attention to Facebook at all, so that probably makes me part of a group of about 3 people in the country. But I do pay attention to Twitter, as most journalists do, and I have 2 feelings about Twitter. One is that everything I see on Twitter, I immediately disbelieve. And I don't take anything at face value, because to me, you get up every morning and every headline to me now reads like it's from The Onion. Like the president said, we're having forest fires in California because we're not raking the forest. But that's from The Onion, right? But that's what it seems like. And so I don't take it as, I saw something on Twitter and therefore it's true. I assume it isn't true. But on the other hand, I do use it as a tip sheet because it leads me to all kinds of stories I wouldn't otherwise see, and that's a huge change now in the diversity of your media diet in the morning. I don't just read the Boston Globe or the Boston Herald and the New York Times. I'm now finding my way to the Washington Post and all kinds of other publications, and this happened just last week. I don't read the Miami Herald, but everyone was buzzing on Twitter about the story on the Miami Herald, a 4-part investigation on Jeffrey Epstein. If you haven't looked at it, man, it will blow your mind. And I wouldn't have seen it probably, but people are tweeting about it, and I find myself having plenty of work to do, going off and to the Miami Herald site and reading this long story about Jeffrey Epstein. And that's a tremendous change that now it connects us all in a whole different way. I think it's like everything, it's good and it's bad in certain ways.
Thank you for your thoughtful responses on that. Yeah, social media might not be something you immediately think about when you're talking about journalism, but we thought it would be important to include today, especially since there are so many youth out there. Yeah, so our next section is about voice in journalism, which is something Claire and I really wanted to talk about and learn ourselves. So as our club has grown and we've gained new members, we've found that one of the most difficult things to do when it comes to editing and monitoring voice, one of the most difficult things to do is to edit out voice and monitor your own voice and opinion when you're writing reports and things like that. So in addition, some of our writers have trouble distinguishing when it is appropriate to include opinion and when it is not. We want our writers' voices to come through in the pieces that they write, but more often than not, it is crucial to omit opinion. We'd love to hear about your experiences as writers and editors when it comes to voice and opinion in the news. So our first question is, for whoever wants to go first again, is it important for journalists to have voice in their articles? And you can talk about whatever types of articles you want, op-eds, reports, feel free.
So voice is really important. It's the way that you write. Voice is not necessarily opinion, and I think that's a really big differentiation to make. You know, your voice is just the style that you write. It might be a little more colloquial, it might be more formal, but it's the words that you pick and the way that you structure your sentences. Opinion is your opinion, and I don't mean to editorialize, but I don't think it belongs in a news piece. I think a news piece should be facts and what's actually happening. And if you have an opinion, it should be in a completely different article. It should be in a clearly labeled opinion piece. I don't think it belongs in a news article. And I think that making sure that news and opinion are very clearly differentiated, both in the article, making sure that people know that there's a difference is really important. And media literacy, again, to get back on that, is really important so that people know how to tell whether something is a news piece or an opinion piece. But don't be afraid to put voice in your pieces, kids. It's the way that you write. But just make sure that opinion isn't voice.
Yeah, that's something I'm trying to teach my freshman journalism as well. Take yourself out of the story. But we tell stories through people. So that's the main goal of journalists. So we may, you may from time to time see, something written in a way that is showing maybe a reporter's personality or something along those lines of voice of writing. But otherwise, yes. And one of the things that I know that my students like to say is, especially since they're coming in after the Trump era, and they're because of they're hoping to give voice to the voiceless, is what most of them say why they have looking to become journalists.
Yeah, so I agree with all that. I'd say we're here to get out of the way of the story, right? That's like kind of You want to get that down. If you can go somewhere and observe and ask the right questions and then say what happened, and unless you were on the other side of that notebook, you're not in that story, right? You're the one observing, you're writing it down, and then you're going to report it back. You're not a part of that. You're the conduit for it. So you want to get if your medium is online or print, you want to get your writing skills down. You want to figure out how to tell the story of what you're seeing going on. You want to get good at that. And then, you develop a voice, you develop a style, you develop an approach. But I would say, too, like nowadays, if you think about probably a lot of you listen to podcasts and This American Life, or even I've read a lot of things in the New Yorker and other places where the hook, the starting point is someone's personal story. And then from there, they go out and they'll tell you, well, I broke my leg one time, and boy, did I find out about the healthcare system, right? And then they go in that way, and there might be even more along the way. But I think you need to be very clear from the outset about what kind of piece you're doing, about what kind of article you're writing. And also another thing too, and I know this is supposed to be a lightning round, but where Abbi worked and at the Advocate and where I worked in Lexington, those papers have an editorial staff of one. And so we were often asked, write an editorial, write an opinion piece. And that can be very tricky when you're reporting on everything that's happening in your town. And so, if you find yourself in that position, as you may here, be really careful about, like, if you say for your student newspaper, you have someone who is a sports reporter, well, maybe they don't write an opinion piece about sports per se, or they do it in such a way that it doesn't interact. You need to be very clear on your boundaries so that your ethics and your standards remain high.
Well, I never worked for a daily newspaper. I started writing magazines, and magazines is what I've done most of my career. And it's a different style of journalism. There's lots of different ways of doing journalism. And what I always thought was important for me to do as a magazine journalist was to have a point of view, to have an argument in my story, not just present the facts and try and be completely balanced. But a magazine story it requires a little bit longer commitment on the part of the reader. And I think the reader's really looking for the writer to, tell me what this story means, or make an argument with this story. And it doesn't mean that you still have to muster your facts. You still have to anticipate the questions that other people have. You still have to, persuade people, logically, step by step, and what's going on, and not try and push something over on people. But there's plenty of room in. It's not just straight news reporting on the one hand and opinion on the other hand. There's this whole world of storytelling that requires a deep engagement by the journalist. Requires the journalist to have a point of view. Requires the journalist to make some attempt to try and figure out what this story means, and then persuade the reader of that.
Yeah, the trick is for the journalist and the editors to understand how to match the right style with the right medium, the right form. You are putting something together in this that is a newspaper, and a newspaper is understood as a particular type of publication with a news section separated from the opinion section. And so if you're doing that and you're not staying with that particular form, people are going to find it confusing that your reporter has a front page story and is interjecting her own opinion here or there. That is jarring. On the other hand, if you're publishing a zine, that's about the music scene or something like that, that's obviously presented in a different form, you're going to have writers who have a lot of voice. Magazines love that, and newspapers do it both ways too. There's no right and wrong. It's just getting it right, getting your story to match the style. And I just was thinking of two examples. that are quite similar and yet came out very different. When you think about the Washington Post doing a major investigation last year into when there was an election in Alabama, Roy Moore was running to replace Jeff Sessions for that Senate seat. The Washington Post did some really solid journalism about accusations that had been made about Roy Moore, and those reporters were very careful. None of them, in documenting the facts, stopped at some point and said, wow, check this out, this blew me away. You know, they didn't put their voice in an investigative piece. You have a style there. And yet, a few weeks ago, maybe a month or two ago, the Washington Post had a similar story by a young writer, Elizabeth Brunig, who works for their opinion section, and did a long piece that was also investigative, where she went back to her high school and remembered an example of a girl there who had been sexually assaulted, came forward, nobody believed her, and the whole story kind of went away. And Elizabeth went back to her high school and decided, I'm going to find out what happened. I'm going to talk to her. I'm going to talk to the people. And she was a part of that story. She went to that high school. And her voice came through in that story, and it was appropriate. That style of storytelling was appropriate for the way she did it, and they ran it in the Sunday opinion section. Both of those stories were on the same subject. Both of them made huge splashes and had a big impact, done in a very different way. So you have to, it's like anything, you have to know the right way to do it at the right time.
Thank you. And to actually lead into what you were just talking about, we'd like to know how to decide between writing an opinion piece versus a report when there is a story out there, but you do have an opinion about it. You know, what can be more effective? Is there kind of, what's the deciding factor between writing those two different types of stories in your personal experience? Whoever wants to go.
It's what my editor tells me to do.
I also want to agree with David that there is analysis that can go on, right? So you know, if you do some deep reporting and then in the end you kind of look at everything that's going on, and there's an analysis and a synthesis that happens in articles. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, if we're talking specifically about your paper, you know, if we're talking specifically about that, I think you kind of, I mean, you don't have to do one or the other, but I think when you're talking about, you know, a newspaper where you have multiple people working on it, you can do one, you can do the other, you can do both, but maybe you don't have the same person who's writing the, you know, the news article about it, writing the opinion piece, right? You pick the people who, I mean, maybe there's something, I mean, you would have to kind of look at each situation as it comes up, right? And see, you know, I mean, I think there's always a case to be made for finding out the information, going to the people involved, asking the questions, doing the research. I think that's your first task, I think, when a story comes up. And then from there, you can figure out what you're going to do. And then a lot of stories, you know, it leads to another story and another, and you can be making decisions along the way. But you can have both. You often have both, right? You open up your paper and there's the news on the first page, and then there's an editorial about it deeper in the paper. So but it's probably good to sort of divide and conquer when you're, especially when you're starting out, when you're talking about a paper where you have many people who can do different things.
The one opinion piece that I ever wrote for The Advocate was about the last selectmen's election and how there were no women who ran in this era of, you know, more women running for Congress and Senate, and kind of analyzing that. I could have reported a piece on it, but I decided to do an opinion. So it's really, you know, kind of what you want to do with that. But I didn't write any other opinion pieces just because as an editorial board of one, it was weird. But where you guys have more people on staff, you can select, you know, one person or two people to be kind of dedicated columnists. When I was the editor of my college paper, we had a couple people who wrote regular columns, either about, personal things or things that were happening at school. And they did some reporting as well, but mostly they were columnists. So if you want to, select people to do those things or, see who's interested, it's kind of up to you. But I would echo Heather's sentiment that, you probably shouldn't have the same person report the story and then write an opinion piece. To me, that just kind of feels a little bit hanky.
Yeah, you just want to have full disclosure and you want to be able to remain credible. So that's why you wouldn't do that. And also think about whether or not you would ever report on that topic in the future. So just choose wisely.
If I can just add that, reporting is the foundation of both those things. You're not going to, unless you're a sports columnist, I suppose. You sit there and make stuff up. I don't know, but any opinion piece that you're going to write has to begin with reporting. You need to know what you're talking about.
Yeah, there are pieces that lend themselves to opinion. And again, I think it comes back to knowing what form is appropriate at what time. And the key point, I think, was made at this end of the panel, especially in local journalism. It really doesn't work very well to have a news reporter out there dealing with both sides of the issue and then at the same time coming and expressing then writing a column expressing opinion about it, because it just makes people think, well, okay, this person already has their mind made up. How do I know they're going to listen to me? So, the New York Times has all of these strong-minded people writing op-ed columns, but they're not the same people that are out there reporting the news.
Thank you. So the last thing we wanted to talk about is the difference between online and print papers and television, which we've touched on a little bit. But in our experience, we had a online paper in the past, and once we printed our physical paper, we got a lot of reactions of people who didn't even know we existed as a group. So for us, having a printed paper was really valuable and helpful to gain traction for our club. But we know that there are many situations when it could go either way. So we wanted to know if you think one is more valuable than the other, and why, and if there's room for both.
I can start on this one. I think both are good. This is like a lot of things. It comes down to yes and no, or either or. I think it's great that you took the effort to make a newspaper and put it in print, and as you saw, it makes an impression on people in a different way. The magazine where I work still prints 6 issues a year, and when you do that, you're involved in a different sort of operation. It's really like more of a craft. You're really being careful to get everything well written, well edited, well proofread, laid out, illustrations. And you do that online too in a different way. But I find that in our magazine, we do the print magazine, but we also do daily web stuff. And I find the web stuff is quick. And they work for both of us. But I also have this sense that it's harder for publications that exist only online to kind of break out from the crowd. There's so much stuff out there, and when you have a print publication, you exist in a different way. It's more tangible, and we've seen just in the last several months some of these upstart publications that had a lot of initial funding that were meant to be for younger readers that were going to just do online journalism. Like one of them was called Mike. Gawker was another one that got put out of business for another reason. But some of these publications that are new and exciting and they have great web design, they're having a hard time getting a purchase, and some of that is the business model. But it's a little bit more ephemeral, and so I think it helps if you still can put a piece of printed matter in front of your readers.
And just a couple quick thoughts. First of all, print is dying. It really is. And My daughter has a story in the current issue of Time magazine, and I can't find Time magazine. I tried to buy it at the at Alewife News. It's called Alewife News. They say news, magazines. They don't sell magazines anymore. They sell snacks. For the longest time, I got the New York Times and the Globe every day, and I loved going through them both. I don't get the Times in print anymore because I can't afford it, so I read that online. I miss it. There's a real difference to me between leafing through a newspaper and reading the same publication online. I think it's a lot easier to fall into, navigating a very narrow path through an online publication, following just the stories that interest you, instead of turning the pages and seeing a story that you didn't know you were interested in, but it turns out to be something useful.
Print is dying, and that makes me very sad because I love print, and I love the coziness of passing around the paper in the morning. There's something much more intimate and immediate to me about holding a magazine and seeing how that is laid out. And I want that to stick around forever, to be honest. That's what I fell in love with all those years ago, and that's what I still really love. And we do get the Globe and print every day. We invest in that, and we'll keep doing that. That said, the International Correspondent magazine that I worked for, it had problems with the business model and leadership, but they were print only, and they are defunct now. And so all of us who wrote articles for that magazine, the editor-in-chief never put any of them online, so they kind of feel like they don't exist, and that's the thing anymore. If it's not online, it kind of doesn't exist. And for all of us in the business who are writing, we email, we apply for jobs, we put our clips out there. People want to see what we read, we share. This is how we share. That's where social media comes in again. So, we're definitely going to have online, and I think these two folks have some thoughts about why that's particularly good.
There's just something about seeing your name in print. It was something that I strived for when I was a younger journalist. But somebody said something to me once in Arlington that they really enjoyed getting the print paper because when they opened it up, they would see articles that they wouldn't have necessarily gone out and sought or came across online. And I really enjoyed hearing that because as a journalist, you put so much time into these things, and online, people don't necessarily read everything, but when it's in print, you don't know that they're reading everything, but you can assume that they're reading most of the things, which is really nice to hear. But I think the medium, it really depends on the immediacy of the news. With online news, you can get things out really quick. There's a super fast turnaround. But with print, whether or not you're a daily or a weekly or you're a magazine that comes out monthly or every other month, you have to really cultivate it, and it's just a different pace. With the Advocate, it was a weekly paper, so there were some things that would have happened the Wednesday before, so it was a week old, but still news. So I think that each medium has different benefits, just depending on how fast you want to get the news out.
If I didn't see it written in the front page of the Globe, I'm not really sure that it happened. I don't necessarily remember to go online, and it doesn't feel like it has as much impact. I look at the Globe, and that sets my context for the day as to what is going on in the world. And hey, well, it was on the front page of the Globe. Well, was it above the fold or below the fold? And then also, but of course, there's advantages and disadvantages. And same thing, I can go through that paper, and I start seeing things that I wouldn't have otherwise seen. If I go online and I click on one story, I'm going to get 10 other stories. Usually, it's about something bad happening to children. I'm like, I definitely don't want to see that, because I see one, I don't want to see 10 more that will then populate what's going on. So there's advantages and disadvantages to both, and I hope that print will not go away. I don't think it's actually going to be going away. Yes, it's maybe dying slowly, but I don't think it's going to be going away actually completely. And then another thing with just television, it's kind of the same thing. I try to tell people, I try to figure out what the heck channel I'm on ACMi, or try to tell them with the different cable channels, but sometimes it's just easier to say, go online.
Can I add one more thing? When Abby was talking, it reminded me, the thing about online, though, is that it is faster, and that has a good and a bad side, and in that we are often rushing to be first now with the online, and that can lead to sloppiness. That can lead to pushing it out before it's fully baked, and that's a problem. It's a real problem. And you see now, people will put, developing story, right? Check back for updates, all that kind of thing. The good news is, until it goes to print, it's really easy to correct or to update, but you don't want to have to correct. So. And it's this, I remember there's one editor I've worked with who's talked about feeding the machine, right? We get kind of addicted to that pace and that speed. And that means, from a personal perspective as a journalist, that means a lot more work potentially, trying to feed these hungry minds, So those are a couple things that I thought of when Abby was talking.
All right, so as we run out of time, I'd just like to ask if anyone would like to make any final remarks before we close out.
I do have one final remark in which I would like to completely contradict myself. I do recommend Neil Postman's book, Amusing Ourselves to Death, but there's a really important distinction that I didn't make in talking about television and print and online journalism, and that's the difference between commercial production and non-commercial production. So he does actually make an argument that the mind receives printed information differently, but there's a huge difference between non-commercial television, something that you see on Frontlines and PBS, or something you see on a documentary or the work that you do, as opposed to ratings, profit-driven entertainment mediums, which is most of the cable stations. And so there really is something that happens in all of our worlds that has to do with deciding what is the right medium for this particular story. And it isn't always print necessarily. I remember reading a book by a very good friend of mine who went and interviewed workers who had lost their jobs because their factories had moved to Mexico. And then he went down to Mexico and talked to the workers there who had these jobs that used to be in New Jersey. And it was a solid book. It wasn't a bestseller, but Molly's Job by my friend Bill Adler. And I remember reading it and appreciating it for what it was and thinking to myself, boy, this would have been a good documentary. I would have loved to have seen him do that as a film documentary instead of a book, because those workers on film would have been compelling in a way that it's really hard to capture some of that, unless you're a really superlative writer. And Bill is good, but that's sometimes you have to ask yourself: is this a magazine article? Is it an op-ed piece? Is it a film documentary? And you can do. Some people are doing great work. I just went a few weeks ago and saw a screening of a film documentary, believe it or not, that was called "What is Democracy?" Now, I would think that's a good topic for a book, but she did it. She did it as a documentary, and it was, I think, quite successful. So, so I don't mean to say that we can't do, that there's not all kinds of really great multimedia. I mean, there's a huge explosion in podcasts now. Radio is such a wonderful storytelling medium. But I still like Neil Postman's book.
I just want to make a quick and passionate pitch, if I can, for journalism. I'm so glad that there's so many people here tonight, and that there's a journalism club at Arlington High, and that you're reporting online and putting out a newspaper. It's for old people like Dave and me, it's really hard time to be a journalist. We came up under a whole different way of doing things, and it's been all we can do to hang on as we switch from paper to online, and I don't know, all the other changes that are happening. But the point is that journalism is not going to go away. Print might go away. Journalism will always be here. If we're going to have a democracy, if we're going to live in an interesting world, if we're going to, live rich lives and have an understanding of other human beings and institutions and all the stuff that makes life rich and worth living, then we're going to need journalists. And for those of you in high school now who are considering going into journalism, I don't think it couldn't be a better time to do it. You're going to be present at the creation of whatever this new world is. Dave and I will be long gone, but there'll be something really interesting happening, I'm sure of it, and you guys have the opportunity to create it.
Yeah, I had a similar kind of sentiment in thinking that, these are now brackish waters that we're in with journalism. I mean, what was is kind of going away, and what will be has not yet fully emerged, I think. What I do know is that there are a lot fewer journalists than there used to be. A lot of people have lost jobs and so forth. But I think we are in this sort of transitional moment, and I don't think that tells me to lose hope. It makes me curious about what comes next. I will say too, at this moment, I went into journalism with international in mind and going all over the place, and I've done that a teeny bit. But what I found in coming back here and reporting is that how important the local story is, and also by reporting abroad, what I learned is how much really just everything is local in a certain way for people. And what concerns me is that we're losing our local newspapers. And I think it's great that you have the high school paper, which is kind of even hyper local paper. But I think that's something if I would want folks to think about today is think about your local paper, who's there, what are they getting paid, what are they able to do, what could we lose if those local papers go away?
Yeah, first of all, I just want to thank you ladies for having us today. You inspire me so much just with the things that you do, and I just want to recognize you for your hard work, so thank you. But to echo Heather, I think that supporting local journalism is really important. I know that when Trump first took office and was raging against journalism, everybody was like, oh my God, go buy a subscription to the New York Times and the Washington Post, and they're doing fine, guys. Buy a subscription to your local paper. The New York Times will be okay, your local paper may not be. So if you want to support journalism, that's a really good way to do it. And also to echo Heather's sentiment, understand the limitations of your local journalist. As a former advocate reporter, it's very difficult to do everything by yourself, as hard as you try. So thank you for that.
And support your local community media access as well. The FCC may be defunding, so it is in jeopardy for local cable access, but local cable access has been around to help inform, cover meetings and so forth, but we have a news program as well. And what local journalists do is we help keep you informed, and you let us know what interests you, and we help keep you informed. If there weren't some of us journalists here covering local news, you may not know about it. I mean, there's certainly ways that you can find out yourselves, but we help put things into context, and we gather varied perspectives, and we talk to various sources and try to just do the best job that we can for you.
All right, so this is the conclusion of our panel. Our panelists will be on the floor if you have any questions for them, if you want to come introduce yourselves. And we still do have baked goods and pizza for sale, which are being sold by our wonderful club. But yeah, can we get another round of applause for our panelists? Thank you.